This lesson is about the establishment of the American government under the U.S. Constitution. Please be sure to refer to the text references noted in Canvas. So, was George Washington our first president? Depends on who you ask. Some would say he was actually our 8th president, while still others would contend he was president number 15. How's this possible? The first iteration of the title, President of the United States, was actually a much longer title than the current more familiar designation, President of the United States in Congress assembled. The document responsible for that name? The Articles of Confederation, the Constitution's forerunner. The Articles of Confederation was the operating document of the newly created United States and was what the government operated under from 1787. The presiding officer of the Congress was given the aforementioned President of the United States in Congress assembled, and there were several men who occupied that office, from the first man to do so from July 1781 in Samuel Huntington, to others like Thomas McKean, to John Hanson. The adoption of the Articles of Confederation was the result of the majority of delegates to the Continental Congress who felt a stronger central government was in order, but was not ready to fully commit to a central government with bolder and more assertive powers. Hence their willingness to adopt a confederated style of government. A confederation is a loose association of states anchored by a weak central government authority. This is contrast to a federation. The opposite of confederation, a federation, is a tightly bound association of states anchored by a strong central government authority. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress only had the following powers: conduct foreign affairs, handle matters of war and peace, issue coinage, establish a postal system, establish a uniform system of weights and measures. As important as what Congress could do under the Articles of Confederation is what it could not do, which included the ability to levy taxes, the power to enforce the use of hard uniform paper currency, the authority to intervene on matters relating to interstate or intrastate commerce, and there was no independent executive to enforce laws. The internal weakness of articles led to the need for a more unifying document with more assertive governing powers. Enter the Constitution. 55 delegates met in Philadelphia from May 25 to September 16, 1787, with 39 of them eventually signing the document that became the U.S. Constitution. Almost immediately, conflicts of interest arose among those from large states such as VA and New York, and from delegates representing small states like NJ and D. These conflicts are well represented in the two different proposals outlining the structure of government set forth by delegates from Virginia and New Jersey. Large State or VA Plan was written by James Madison and presented to other delegates on the floor of the Congress by Edmund Randolph, also of Virginia. Madison's plan advanced the following features for the proposed new government. The legislature was to be bicameral, 2 houses, and representation was to be proportional, based upon population. The chief executive was to be chosen by the legislature. The judiciary was to be chosen by the legislature. The Virginia plan prompted disagreement from delegates from smaller states who rightfully noted the advantages this plan gave larger states at the expense of smaller ones. A competing proposal was offered in the so-called Small State or NJ Plan, written and presented by William Paterson of NJ. Paterson's ideas amounted to no more than a simple reshaping of the Articles of Confederation. The plan offered the idea of a unicameral, one-house, legislature in which all states would have an equal number of votes. Paterson did advance one highly valuable idea. All acts of the United States in Congress made in pursuance of the powers hereby and by the Articles of Confederation vested in them, and all treaties made and ratified under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the respective states, and the judiciary of the several states shall be bound thereby in their decisions. Anything in the respective laws of the individual states to the contrary notwithstanding. Why is this significant? This was an expression of the supremacy of federal law. Those state laws which ran counter to federal statutes were to be voided. After several weeks of debate, a compromise was achieved by combining elements of both plans. The current Constitution is a result of this compromise, and in it are: from the Vernia Plan, bicameral legislative body, independent judiciary nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate, independent legislative branch, one house proportional representation, the other house, set representation regardless of a state's population. Elements from the New Jersey Plan. Supremacy of the Federal Law Clause, Article 6, Section 2. Referred to as the keystone of the Constitution. Necessary and Proper Clause, Article 1, Section 8. This clause gave government the power to make laws necessary to implement the so-called enumerated powers. After several weeks of debate, a compromise was achieved by combining elements of both plans. The current Constitution is a result of this compromise, and in it are: from the Vernia Plan, bicameral legislative body, independent judiciary nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate, independent legislative branch, one house proportional representation, the other house, set representation regardless of a state's population. Elements from the New Jersey Plan. Supremacy of the Federal Law Clause, Article 6, Section 2. Referred to as the keystone of the Constitution. Necessary and Proper Clause, Article 1, Section 8. This clause gave government the power to make laws necessary to implement the so-called enumerated powers. The ratification of the document setting in place the government of the new nation missed an obvious opportunity to eradicate the institution. In many ways, the document strengthened the institution, or at the very least, lent a new air of ambiguity to its future, thus setting the stage for future conflict in the years to come. We will look at two specific clauses. Section 9, Article 1, banned the direct importation of slaves from Africa effective January 1, 1808. At the time this provision was due to go into effect, another 20 years would have elapsed. Why? This is because the Constitution gets ratified in 1788. Some might argue that the 20-year wait time for the implementation of this provision allowed direct importation to continue for at least a generation, presumably to allow slave-based economies the opportunity to both replenish lost stock in the wake of the American Revolution and to allow slave-based economies the chance to ready themselves for the day when direct importation would no longer be legal. The other clause explicitly dealing with slavery was Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, better known as the 3/5 Clause. When proportionate representation was established for the House of Representatives, another dispute arose that originated from the Virginia delegation. As representatives of one of the largest states in the new nation, VA delegates did not want tax assessments to be based on a state's population, believing that larger states would have to unfairly bear the tax burdens for every other state simply because they had more people. However, this same delegation wanted their slaves to count in determining how many representatives a state could send to the House, since that determination was based on a state's population. Put another way, for taxation purposes, VA did not want their slaves to count, but for representation purposes, they did want their slaves to count. States with smaller populations and smaller concentrations of slaves rightly accused the Virginians of wanting their cake and eating it too. So it is against this backdrop that Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 was added to the Constitution, the 3/5 Clause. It stated that for taxation and representation purposes, slaves would count as 3/5 of every one free person. Finally, there is the Fugitive Slave Clause. This provision stated that even if a slave escaped to a state where slavery was not legal, it did not mean that he or she could not be apprehended and returned to enslavement in the state he or she left. In fact, according to this clause, the state had a duty to assist in the apprehension of said slave so he or she could be returned to the rightful owner. It should be noted that the Constitution never used the word slave or slavery in any of its original language, even in clauses directly related to the institution. Euphemisms like importation of other persons, those held in service or servitude, were used, but not the terms slave or slavery directly. Fascinating. As the 1800s wore on, it becomes painfully apparent that the federal government will become a willing participant in the continuation of slavery. This concludes this lesson. Be sure to review the relevant text references and to contact the instructor with any questions you may have.